I am Alan Levine talking to my good dear friend Barbara Ganley, who's in Vermont, and I'm in Kamloops. And much of the work I've been doing now with these connected courses is related to this idea of having students or participants blog in their own spaces and aggregating it into a hub. And it's been successful. A lot of people are interested in it. But you did this way back when, in like 2002. And so I wanted to talk to the mother of the Motherblog, if I could call you that.
The mother, all right. Yes. At least you're not calling me the grandmother.
No, no, I took the grand out of you. But like, where did I mean, first of all, I mean, always you were a big influence just as an early blogger, period, in those days, and probably among the first educational bloggers. You know, Brian Alexander was doing it, and the other Brians. But do you remember like what was the impetus to have this idea of having students write in their own blogs?
Yeah. Well, being a writing teacher, having kids write in their own spaces was something I always did way before the advent of using computer technology in the classroom. So that was a very natural thing to have students write in their own spaces. What was different and most exciting to me was the fact that they could do this so that everybody could see it. That is no longer in a private notebook. But what if you shared the entire process? What if you got to have conversations about what you were writing or what you were thinking about writing or the books you were reading or the films we were seeing or the people who came in to give lectures or anything? What if the classroom became a conversation itself? And it didn't matter if we were meeting or not. And it didn't matter where anybody was if we could do this. And this particularly became so apparent to me that this was the way to go, because the first day of the first class that I was going to use a blog in, the first day of that class meeting was 9/11.
Mm.
And it was a first year seminar, and our first day of class was 9/11. So going in and those students so shaken and me so shaken, everybody so confused. The last thing you want to do is send those kids out and go write about this by yourselves, go process this by yourselves. And it was a course on Ireland. And we were looking at the Irish Troubles through fiction and film. And so it seemed to me the most amazing opportunity for us to see the times that we were living in as the chance to come together and talk about things and make some sense of it and become better writers and thinkers as a result, and a real community.
But obviously, you couldn't put 9/11 in your schedule. What was sort of
No.
like the way you were going to sell your students on this idea of blog writing? Because the
Yeah.
internet was not nearly as
No.
way before social media and people
Yeah.
participating online.
Live journal, maybe. Wasn't that what it's called?
Mm-hmm.
Some of the kids had some things. Some of the kids were doing little movies on their own and showing it to us. There were some of these kids, especially first years, the younger kids, the 18-year-olds in 2001. Some of them were messing around and doing some cool stuff.
I should add that this is at Middlebury College. I
It's the
forgot.
Middlebury College, that's right. So I was very lucky to decide to start with the young ones, because also first semester of the first year, they're going to do whatever the teacher tells them to do. The seniors, not a chance, but the first years, absolutely. So what I explained to them that one of the incentives that we had for participating on this blog, so we had the mother blog. Everybody had their own individual blogs, but they were linked onto the mother blog. And some of the things that we all had to do were only on the mother blog. We had this, the main space of the mother blog was our ongoing conversation. And part of the way to get the kids excited about that and trusting it is that I happen to have a bunch of friends in Ireland who were the filmmakers and the novelists that we were studying. And I invited them to participate in this course through this vehicle and set them up to be part of it. And that anytime when we got to their novel, and we're discussing it, they would be invited in, or they could, leave comments on the kids' papers or something. And I remember distinctly this one kid who really didn't think this was a great idea at all. But he wrote his, he had a little response to a piece of a novel, and the novelist got on and wrote to him. And then somebody else did it about something we read, and I didn't know that writer, so I had not invited that writer in. But that writer heard, Ireland's a very small school, a really small town, that apparently heard from the other guy and got in and started to say, hey, that's a really interesting response you have to that character, and I haven't thought about that before. And so the kids saw that this was authentic. The kids saw that this wasn't just me giving them more work or a way that they could make fools out of themselves, but that this was truly exciting. They could converse with the very people they were studying. It doesn't mean that it all went smoothly. There were some kids who were resistant to it, who felt they felt that it put, that kids who were not very confident in their writing, it was really hard for them to put their stuff out in public to begin with. But as soon as it wasn't associated with grades, it wasn't associated with being corrected, but it was all about participating together and learning together, then they could slowly find their way. And some kids were the ones who started to get the ideas of this could be a visual medium. We could participate by having stuff that we added in terms of photographs and video. And other kids were really just the writers. And other kids liked to organize things, and so everybody found their way to participate. And I said, I have no idea what we're doing here. And I don't have any precedents. I don't know there's nobody I can look at to see how to do this. We're just going to do it. But let's have faith in the fact that maybe it's going to give us something that we never could do before. And in fact, for the kids from that first class, were so excited about the results that they decided they needed to go to Ireland and shoot web films about the issues we had discussed. But they wanted to do it from their perspective of having been the readers, the viewers, and then the correspondence with these filmmakers and novelists. And so they wrote a grant to the college to go in the summer to Ireland to shoot web films. And then their idea was to come and work in local elementary schools with the local kids on issues that were important to them about web films and setting up blogs in their 5th grade classrooms.
This is the students' idea.
This was the students' idea,
Brilliant.
totally.
Yeah.
They wrote the grant, they got the grant, and they got the grants that I would take them because I was the only one who knew Ireland, and I was their chauffeur. They set up all they had 8 days to shoot the films, to do the interviews, to do all the stuff they had to do. And then they came back and did all the editing, and they learned how to do Final Cut Pro on their own. And, they just figured it out. And we did it, and they did it, and they came back and they worked in the elementary schools, and they set up the first elementary school blogs. I'm sure in this state, if not Peter Forbes was doing it in Holland back then. I think Ewan McIntosh was doing a little bit in Scotland in those days. There were a few. Who's the guy who was doing Bob in Maine, who did all the little podcasts with his class?
Oh, yeah.
He had a 3rd grade classroom. So there were these little pockets I saw of elementary schools who were playing around with this, but I couldn't see any college.
Right. So this was on Movable Type was your platform, right? That the university had.
In the beginning, yeah.
Yeah. How did you get this idea that you could connect the students' blogs to the Motherblog? I mean,
well, I was really lucky because I had Middlebury had what was the sort of precursor to Nightly right there on campus, and Brian Alexander's predecessor, Hector Vila, was really interested in how to connect things. So he actually did some fancy hacking in the background of the underneath, because you couldn't just naturally link them. He had to actually do some coding under there, under the hood, to make it work. Because I just told him what I wanted. I said, is there a way that we can connect everybody all the time, and like and I just called it, I said, in the Motherblog, like the mothership, we got to have everybody see everybody's work, because that's been the problem
Right.
up till now, is kids have been able to, they, you know, you and I were talking earlier about ownership and what do you share, and what do you know, what is all this with egos and competition? Why, who are you competing against? You're trying to be the best writer you can be, not next to the guy next to you. And the more you help him, the more you help you. And so, but you can't make that happen if you all have your separate spaces, and if all you're doing and your only audience is the teacher.
Right, right. I sometimes, not that I've ever worked in an art studio, but to me, like that, where people are doing individual creative work within proximity, and they're not always like looking and talking, but just
Right.
being in a room, in this case, a virtual room where people are creating next to you, has a certain energy to it.
Oh, it does. It absolutely does. And I next went to creative writing classes with this, and those kids were all over it, because they saw precisely that, the workshop method, the ability, because kids who take creative writing at Middlebury, they want to be writers. They're sort of self-selected, so they want people to read their stuff. They want their drafts to be looked at. And it really opened up the possibility for them to be teaching each other all the way along. It really allowed me, teachers are always talking about getting off the stage and to the side, but they don't do it. They
Yeah.
can't do it, maybe. But with the Motherblog, you totally can do it. Not only can you do it, you have to do it. You don't have any choice. Because if it's really working, the class becomes so much more than anything that you have contributed.
And the other thing I always respected about what you did, and Jim Groom picked it up, is that you were writing with them. You were doing the
Oh, yeah.
same assignments.
Absolutely. I always did the same assignments. I never, I don't understand that people feel as though they're above and down the line and they don't need to do this anymore. No, I was one of the community. And if I told them that we were a community of writers, then I had to behave as a member of that community. I couldn't hold myself apart. And sometimes, and you know what? Here's this really sweet little story about that, is that, as you know, many, 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 many years later, here I am all very excited because I have a story coming out, and I've returned to my fiction writing after all these years. And I have a story that's just come out in the latest issue of Glimmer Train. And it's my students, my old students, and I haven't been at Middlebury for ages now, but they're all over it. And I'm getting emails from them and texts, and they're so excited because they feel like they were part of a community with me, and they're cheering me on. They don't have to have this relationship with me that I have. I'm different from, maybe, yes, I've had more experience, but it doesn't mean I'm the best writer in the room.
But still, I mean, your idea kind of inspired, Gardner and the UMW people, inspired me, and this is still a thing that we're trying to inspire other people about, the same idea of the distributed, collected classroom.
Yeah. And I think another piece of that is really hard for some teachers is the evaluation piece, because I felt very strongly, and in fact, a lot of this, it was a natural outgrowth that once you take one step down the road, the whole thing opens up to you. And I think that's one of the reasons people are scared of it, because they kind of see that. Mm-hmm. But at the beginning of every semester and every class that I taught, we established the grading rubric ourselves together. I said, what does excellence look like here? What should it look like? And how will we know when we're in the presence of it?
How variable were those rubrics that over periods that students came up with? Did they change much?
Oh, not really. And I would show them, as the years went by, I would show them what previous students had done, and as a starting point for them, if they want, I say, yeah, I'd be happy to show you what other classes came up with, and And, you know, for the first 3 weeks of any course, the students wanted to throw me out the window for abdicating my responsibility or being inept or lazy. Whatever, you know, this was so extraordinarily different from anything that they'd ever experienced before. And they thought it was preposterous. I was the one. How did they know? I was the one who was supposed to tell them whether they did it right or not. And I'm going, well, great. What good is that going to do to you if you have no ability to recognize whether what you've done is successful and meets a particular standard that who's setting and who's saying? So you're going to understand far better how to get there if you understand how to set that standard. And so, yes, they found it very difficult, but by the end of every semester, every course, they were almost all of them completely excited and enthusiastic about all this. Even kids who hated the blog, who hated blogging. Even now, I still get emails from students from 2001.
Wow.
Say, gosh, now I'm a blankety, you know, I'm a coder, or I work in digital storytelling, or I'm a teacher now, and I get it.
Yeah.
You know, I get it.
You know, and I think about, I mean, so much we focus on like the assessment or figuring out what students got right at the end of the class, and this stuff doesn't happen until years down the line.
That's right.
And like we lose track of that. It's all focused on, you know, right there, boom, the class is over.
Yep.
Was it successful? No, you just planted the seeds and
Exactly.
let it go. I'm also curious, I mean, probably then, as is now, there's this natural aversion to people about putting things out that aren't finished or that aren't well formed, and it's all focused on the final thing. And were your students? Did you have them like writing about their writing or reflecting on their process?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely, because especially with the institution at which I was, you know, the kids who come to Middlebury College are very accustomed, this is how I always put it, that they will produce the very best work I've ever seen. I just have to tell them what that is. and then they will give it to me. And so, of course, I say I have no idea because I'm not them. But so in order to loosen them up from that need to produce the perfect piece, and therefore they can't show anything in process, that one of the pieces was meta-narratives all the time, reflections, that was actually a required piece, that they had to do reflection. And they had to do that publicly too. They had to do reflections on their own work and reflections on their own interactions. How were they as a community member? How did they, you know, what kind of, were they the quiet one who people came to for this, or were they the funny one who, you know, how did that, so that they got to know themselves, not only as students in this class, but as collaborators in a bigger canvas, you know, in even the biggest canvases of life. What could be better than that, than learning about yourself, both you know, within this particular context of this subject matter, but all the way out, because it was very clear that these kids had to understand how to be, you know, like Barry Wellman talked about the shape-shifting portfolio people, and they had to be flexible and quick, and ability to morph into lots of different roles and things to do. And so I couldn't just keep them in one. So reflection was incredibly important to that. That's the long answer.
It's a beautiful one. Well, thanks for sharing. Because to me, I mean, the sad thing I know is that the blogs were lost in the technology shuffle. So
that's the old short-sightedness.
Yeah.
And also, quite frankly, the hardest thing was not working with my students. The hardest thing was the academy. Because that they didn't, you know, it was very hard for colleagues to understand. It was very hard. And I don't just mean in Middlebury, I mean in the larger world, which is why and people like me were thrust onto a stage that I wasn't comfortable with. I didn't want to go around the world talking about this stuff. I just wanted to be doing this stuff. But if we didn't get out there in those early days, then, you know, we couldn't shake it up quite as much, how people dare do it as well.
I'm glad you went to Faculty Academy when I was there.
Yeah, that was a great time.
Wasn't it?
Really, it was. It was one of those special moments in those early days where
Yeah.
everybody was going, yeah, yeah, yeah. And have you tried that? That's when I learned how to do Twitter at Faculty Academy. You taught us all how to do Twitter.
Yeah, the good old days. They're still here, I think. I'd like to think.
Yeah, well, you and Jim and Gardner and Brian and Scott and all of those folks and Jen, you guys are still really doing it and making it the good old days. I jumped ship some time ago to.
Yeah, but you set us up, so mutual hugs all around. Thanks a lot. I'm going to turn off the
Okay.
recording.